Welcome to Good Things Happening, the show that explores the sustainability progress that's being made just under the surface at your favorite brand or company. I'm your host, Derek Sabori, and these are the people making it happen. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for tuning in and being here. I'm Derek Sabori, and I am here with McKenzie Wilson for our weekly highlights show. McKenzie, how you doing today?
Doing well, Derek. How are you doing? Happy Memorial Day.
Yeah, we're recording this on Memorial Day. The work never stops for us over here at the Underswell, but we've got a lot of great things that we're trying to get out your way, trying to, in a weekly show, get these topics out to you. There's just cool, fun things in the news that we want to share, and most of this comes from the newsletter that we put out each week. McKenzie curates happenings, news, things that we think you should know about, things that we think are cool related to sustainability, brands, doing things better, anything that has to do with, good things happening. And here's our chance to just kind of talk about these things, break them down, add some insights where we can. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think also just bringing news stories in general, things that might have slipped under the radar on regular news streams. We use LinkedIn a lot for our resources. So I think we're just finding all the little pieces of gold that we can bring to the audience.
Little pieces of gold. And for example, in our last week's show, if you haven't checked it out, make sure you go back. We've been doing this for a few weeks now, and we'll continue to go forward. We're also, as a note, we've already banked a handful of expert interviews. This show is also going to revolve around these expert interviews that we're bringing on, reaching out to people who are either leaders at purpose-driven companies or who have been in this space for a long time. We want to give their insights and perspectives to you. But while we're doing that, McKenzie and I have been putting these little weekly shows out to kind of keep things warm and start to warm up our podcasting chops. And we're putting them over on YouTube as well. So if you're listening to this, you can go check out the YouTube channel. But last week, we talked about a few things. For example, we talked about the Colorado River Agreement, an agreement for the Western states on managing water out here in the West as we deal with climate change, the climate crisis, droughts, and in this case, this season, an overabundance of water. We'll see how that all plays out. We had comments on that. There was a great article in Forbes about dealing with not organic cotton, which is about 1% of the marketplace, but the other 99%. We talked about that. That's an article that was written by Brooke Roberts Islam over on Forbes. She's one of our kind of go-to sustainability reporters doing some great work. And then there was a Sustainable Brands Consumer Behavior Report that we really touched on. McKenzie, and that one was really, I think, fun. We kind of spent our most time talking about that. Which of those stories really resonated with you? What did you like about last week's show? What do we want people to take away or go back and look at?
Probably for me, as a Californian, what's most important to me is the Colorado River story. There's so much back and forth, and the Colorado River has such an interesting history along these Western states that I think that's no matter where you live, whether you're in the United States, outside of the United States, it's just really interesting to see how divided people can get over natural resources. So, and something we need to survive.
Yeah, and you know what? So just coincidentally, and this is sort of off topic, but coincidentally, this weekend was the WSL, the Surf Ranch Pro.
Mm-hmm.
So, right, and if you're a surfing fan, this is one of the stops that is on the tour now. And there have been multiple surf parks that have been developed, different technologies developed. This particular one was developed by Kelly Slater and his team. Great event, but I couldn't help but think about the sort of the growing field here that is wave pool technology. Somebody told me the other day, like it or not, this is happening. It's coming. This will be a major part of our lives. But that's a lot of water in there. This is essentially, high-end water parks in a time of drought in a lot of regions. And I did have a moment going, ooh, this will be interesting to see how this plays out and where it goes. And I actually should say, I'm not putting any blame or pointing any fingers because actually I don't know where that water came from, where they're getting it from. Maybe they're carting in salt water. I don't from the ocean. Who
Right.
knows? But right, something to I think about. That's part of what we try to do is try to get everybody to think about all the different parts of products, services, things that we love, and try to consider the environmental and social impacts. So water for
Absolutely.
sure, definitely something that's on our minds, right?
Yeah, yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
So, what do we have for this week, McKenzie? I know you. I really like these stories. You've got three things that you queued up for us. What are we diving into today?
Well, I think the first story that we should start with, and maybe this is going to be deja vu for some people, we have another Greenpeace report. So this one, for people who maybe didn't catch that, I believe it was the first or second episode that we did on the Greenpeace Greenwash Danger Zone report, which looked at greenwashing across, I believe it was 14 European eco labels. This report today that we're going to be discussing is called Greenpeace Forever Toxic. And it's looking at the chemical inputs that go into the plastics industry and also which of those chemical inputs stay through the recycling process.
And there's a lot of technical kind of chemicals speak in there, toxicity speak in there, if you will. So we'll
Mm-hmm.
dive into that one. And I will say to people, I do. I'm a big fan of the work and the pressure that Greenpeace puts on organizations, industries, and I think most NGOs are doing great work like that, and that's their job, is to put pressure on the system. Because I do think sometimes people go, Greenpeace, a little too radical, too much. They're not looking at it from the business side. But I think that is exactly what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to push as hard as they can the other way to get business and industry to go, oh, okay, we've got a problem here. We'll kind of start to maybe meet towards the middle. I think they do great work, so I'm excited to talk about that one. What do we look at after that? Because we've got another one lined up after that.
Yeah, yeah. I think the next one on the list should be a Guardian investigation into carbon credits, and specifically, they did an investigation on, I believe it's Vera. I think that's how the company is pronounced. But there is talk that maybe these carbon credits that have been given to these companies, really well known companies, are actually worthless. I think that's the word that Guardian chose to use in their investigation, is worthless.
So we'll dive in and see if we have to edit that out. Good, good point. But it's the headline is that their CEO is stepping down after an investigation has revealed that millions of credits that were sold were, like you said, worthless. So we'll look at that, and then to wrap things up, we'll look at a BBC article that was recently in the news that kind of caught the attention of a lot of people in the surf industry. So we'll go back to that surfing topic, kind of a call out and a criticism of the surf industry needing to be more sustainable. A UK pro surfer, national champion Lucy Campbell. She had really advocated for brands to do more around. I guess this article really focused on surfboards and wetsuits, so we're going to dive into that and talk a little bit about that. So let's take it back to the top. Let's dive in and have a look at this report by Greenpeace, Forever Toxic. This really was, like you said, an expose on the chemical risks that are associated with plastic recycling across a number of industries. And what's really interesting is it feels like they were kind of nudging and poking at all forms of plastic, recycled plastic, the recycling industry, the collection industry, virgin plastic, and essentially saying at every stage, no matter what type of plastic you're using, there are toxins and impacts to people and humans and ecosystems along the way at every point, all forms of plastic. And they're really calling for this global plastics treaty to reduce the amount of plastics that we're using. Throwing it back to you, McKenzie. Am I on track with that? Is that what they're saying? What else did you pick up from this article?
Yeah, well, I thought this article was really interesting because there were so many different data points about the risks associated with, like you said, plastic production, virgin plastic production, the collection process, and what these workers and surrounding communities are exposed to, and then also the recycling process. And even, I mean, it's so interesting because I think maybe people know, maybe they don't. There's mechanically recycled plastics and there's chemically recycled plastics. And they're even saying, Greenpeace is saying, like, doesn't matter how you recycle it, these chemicals stay within the plastic and potentially can impact consumers. So it's just really eye opening. And the chemicals world is so broad.
Yeah, I think it's eye-opening, maybe a little disheartening. I know in most
Mhm.
industries, and even consumers are really excited about the idea of being able to recycle your plastic. That's something that we have been told is the right thing to do or a good thing. in industries, whether it's consumer goods, the textile industry, etc., we are using more and more recycled plastic, so as not to use virgin plastic or rely on the continued use of fossil fuels and petrochemicals. But this industry really, I mean, this report sort of says none of it is good. What we need to do is stop, relying on and making so much plastic. This
Hmm.
global plastics treaty that they're saying is a treaty that they say that the world should adopt. It would promote safer, toxic free materials and reuse based zero waste economies, creating new jobs to support these practices, protecting human and planetary health, minimizing resource use, and delivering a just transition for workers and affected communities across the plastic supply and waste chains. When you hear that, I like that they're saying a just transition for workers and affected communities. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think that means reskilling people. That's a word that we hear a lot. And basically that means taking people that might have had one job, I guess in the plastics industry, maybe that's someone who's a collector who is exposed to different chemicals and maybe contaminants, and figuring out a way where they can still retain their job, maybe even get a better job, and reduce the risks and the hazards that they would have experienced in their previous job. So I think it's, to me, just transition is maybe about equality or creating more equitable work experiences for people around the world across different industries.
Yeah, I love that, and just bringing those people along with us on this new pathway that they're suggesting, rather than just sort of
Mhm.
cutting ties and leaving a whole group of people behind who have been doing all this work, who may or may not have, as you said, known better, had better, whatever it might be. So
Right.
this report, so well said, perfect. This report is saying that we must cap and reduce plastic pollution and establish a pathway to end virgin plastic production. McKenzie, what do you think? And I wonder what most people would think. How much of all the plastics that have ever been produced have been recycled, would you say? Maybe you
Yeah.
caught it in the article off the top of your head. What do you think? What would your guess have been?
Yeah, I think before reading this article, I would have guessed maybe globally percentages of plastic actually recycled across the two different recycling technologies, maybe 40%,
Yeah, and
somewhere around there.
that might have been generous. They're saying this report is saying that fewer than 10% of all plastics ever produced have been recycled. And to me, that's crazy. They say the reality is that most plastics collected for recycling are never recycled. And when plastics are recycled, they contain a toxic cocktail of chemicals that makes them unfit for food grade and other consumer uses. In fact, plastics are inherently incompatible with a circular economy. That's going to be a little bit heartbreaking and discouraging for people who are really pushing to put recycled content in there, or, lean into recycling, would you say?
Yeah, yeah, and I definitely have a lot of questions about that statement. Yeah, I mean, really, this report is just question after, for me, question after question after question. So yeah, it's tricky.
I agree with you. I had a lot of questions here too, just going, okay, so how then? I don't feel like it gave us a true roadmap to how they do at the
Mhm.
end. And we'll put the link in here for you guys so you can see this global plastics treaty. There's a list of things that they suggest. In fact, they give us the list. Actually, they give us 7 different things that we need to do on this new in this new treaty. But it is, essentially the takeaway though from this report is that dangerous chemicals in recycled plastics. They say there are 3 poisonous pathways. Those 3 poisonous pathways are: 1, toxic chemicals in new virgin plastic materials; 2, leaching of toxic substances into plastic waste; and then 3, new toxic chemicals that are created by the recycling process. So they warn us to get in there and understand all this. In this report, they're talking about brominated dioxins, benzene, PVC, endocrine disruptors, toxins that last, that are persistent. There's a new phrase that I learned in here, McKenzie. It's called POPs waste. Did you catch that?
Yeah,
Yeah, persistent organic pollutants. These are among the world's most toxic chemicals. And I guess these came from the Stockholm Convention. And there was a convention on persistent organic pollutants. This was adopted in 2001 in Sweden. and it went into force in 2004, but it eliminates, it says that we have to eliminate all of these persistent organic pollutants. There's a lot in here to learn. To me, it felt kind of data heavy, a lot of data points, a lot of things that just were meant to sort of like shake you and wake you up and say, hey,
Mhm.
there's a lot of issues with plastic, right? Was there anything I missed, you think, in there, or is that how you felt as well?
Yeah, I definitely think it was funny when I started reading it, I felt like this was going to be just about plastics in general, their inherent characteristics and how they interact in our lives. But it did become more of a chemicals report. And I think anybody knows how difficult chemistry can be to understand. And like you said, you brought up POPs, the persistent organic pollutants. They also bring up VOCs, the volatile organic compounds. So when I was writing an article on this report for the Member Resource Center, it was like, okay, got to get out like the chemistry textbook and all the chemistry resources and research what all these acronyms stand for to figure out like, okay, so what's going on? How severe is this? Be prepared. If you read this report, you're probably going to need to do some research on chemistry, but it's well worth it. It's a really interesting head scratcher.
Yeah, and it's not that long. It's about 22 pages. Essentially, they're saying that even with all of the issues that are associated with plastic production or plastic recycling or collection and sorting, they're saying that plastic production is forecast to triple by 2060. That's crazy because it feels like a lot of us are concerned with plastic in every industry, at every part of our value chain. So they are saying that it's time to end the love affair with plastic and recycled content and focus on reducing plastic production and use altogether. So if you want to see those 7 recommendations that they have, go check out the report. We'll put it here in the link for you. Forever Toxic by Greenpeace, again, an organization that kind of keeps pushing on us. They're saying this is the science and on health threats that exist from plastic recycling. So we'll leave that there for you guys. McKenzie, what else is on the list? Unless you've got any other thoughts on plastics, the toxic nightmare that is apparently plastics and plastic pollution. What else you got?
Yeah, I think next on the list, we need to go over the carbon credits, which I don't think, unfortunately, gets any better than the plastic recycling problem. And Derek, I really think you're probably going to be more educated and informed on this than I am. Carbon credits are pretty new to me in my sustainability journey. And I mean, this is another kind of complex, intricate, technical topic.
Yeah, it's true because it can be a little tough because there are, we have carbon credits, you have carbon offsets, kind of different things. What makes a good carbon offset? This article, so we'll dive into some of that. We'll leave some resources for you guys to be able to check that out as well. But essentially, this carbon market, where if you are emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, whether it's carbon, methane, etc., you can essentially buy some sort of offset to say, hey, we are going to invest in a project that will actually reduce or sequester carbon. And so we're going to pay out to that, and that will help us kind of balance out what we are emitting, our organization. Well, in order to do that, these most of these projects, one, there's a couple good things. There's a couple things to consider. A good carbon offset is one that is focused on what we call additionality. And so this means that it was an additional project that was not going to be there otherwise. So that the dollars that a company pays to, kind of offset their emissions goes into a project that without that help or without that investment would not have existed. So if there is already something there, or if a project was already funded and you're just adding money to it or taking, giving them a credit, then that's not an additional project. So it has to focus on additionality, has to be properly estimated. It has to be a permanent solution. It's exclusive. There are no social or environmental harms associated with it. And then most of all, it has to be third party verified. This article then points this whole problem out because each third party has its own verification process. So apparently there aren't, very good standards or universal standards, just kind of like a lot of the different standards and audits and certifications that we've talked about. But
Right.
the global standard is what's called the Verified Carbon Standard, VCS. And this organization or company, Vera, is one of the many third-party verification organizations, and they're really they've been a really well-known, I think, and respected one. And so they have, rules and regulations to ensure that all of these greenhouse gas removals or reductions, that they are real and measurable, additional, conservative, permanent, independently verified, and can be numbered and transparently listed. But I think the hard part for this article is saying that in January, a 9-month investigation by The Guardian, the German weekly Die Zeit, and the investigative group Source Material found Vera rainforest credits used by groups, big, well-known brands and companies like Disney, Shell, Gucci, and other big corporations, it says in this article. I'm just quoting it from the article, were largely worthless, often based on stopping the destruction of rainforests that were not threatened, according to the independent studies. So right there is an example of, you feel like, hey, we are putting money into this, but that was a project that wasn't even going to be threatened in the first place. So these are worthless, they're not additional. Now, the CEO of Vera has apparently rejected the findings of the investigation, has defended Vera's impact on the conservation of rainforests, and the organization is in the process of introducing new rules for generating rainforest carbon credits. But I think companies have pulled back on them. This is definitely, to your point, McKenzie, a space that I'm not super well versed in as well. So we will sort of leave it out here for you guys to dive in. We'll put some links here for you to learn as well. There's a really good site that I'll put in here to MIT's climate portal. They break down what carbon offsets are, how those offsets keep CO2 out of the atmosphere, what the benefits and challenges are, etc. That's a good one. There's actually another good piece in here from a group called TerraPass. And actually, TerraPass actually does do carbon offsets themselves. But I like this blog post that they did, kind of saying carbon offset verification. Are your offsets legit? And the same thing, they go through, they'll break down how carbon offsets are verified, who some of these verifiers are, whether they're legitimate, what makes a good offset, etc. So there's a lot, I think, for all of us to learn in this space. But it's also important to keep up on the news like this, because right when you think you're doing something good or using a good verifier, feels like the carpet can get pulled out from under us. How does it, McKenzie? It feels like, even with the article that we looked at last week with Forbes, with the organic cotton, it feels like whichever way you turn, there is going to be some sort of snafu or something that's going to get you. That makes it tough for brands and individual and consumers as well, right? Going back to the greenwashing report, companies can say, hey, don't worry, we offsetted our emissions, but yet how is a consumer, how does the average person read through all this and figure it all out? Is it even possible? How do we figure it out?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I don't know. I don't know if everyone is going to be able to figure this out. I think there are probably going to be a lot of experts and people who are way more educated in this than I am, who can find really good solutions. But I do know there's actually another resource that we'll put into the show notes. Cal Penn, who, everyone probably knows him from the Harold and Kumar series. He actually has a really good show on Bloomberg Green. And they do an episode, which again, we'll link in the show notes. They do an episode talking about carbon offsets, carbon credits, and they kind of question it. They kind of question that whole system. And it's like, should we be focusing on this, or should we really just be asking brands and putting the pressure on brands and companies to just reduce their emissions straight up right out of the gate? So
Great point. Great point. And I'm going to jump on that real quick, because that is absolutely what we should be doing for sure, right? And this is this idea of net zero. Companies, the net zero or 1.5 degree pathway is such that every industry, every company essentially should be reducing their emissions for whatever baseline you are at. Those should be dropped by 50% in the next 7 years at this point. Sorry. 7 years to drop it by 50%. And then from there, move down to essentially as close to zero as possible. That doesn't mean continue to pollute your heat trapping gases and then offset them with something. They are saying drive that down to zero. So to your point, that is task number one, is reducing the amount of greenhouse gases you're putting into the atmosphere. Carbon credits or carbon offsets were meant to just sort of cover you for that last small bit that maybe technology hasn't, solved yet. We're not able to reduce those yet, or it's just not realistic, or it's too expensive. Whatever reason is getting you from getting down to zero, this is where these come in at the very end. In the past, though, it wasn't always that way. So I think as long as you're using them responsibly, then they can be a good thing. And I'm sure
Mhm.
there are other experts that we'll bring on. And in fact, one of our upcoming guests will be my friends over at Sustainable Surf, who have a great blue carbon credit program. It's called Sea Trees. And Sea Trees is basically companies can go in, you can buy these credits for mangroves and kelp to be planted. Really cool project, and I know they've been working on it for years. And these blue credits are apparently really impactful for them as well. So, Michael Stewart, who will be on the show soon, is an expert in this. He has a background in carbon credits and offsets, so it'll be interesting to get his take on this story as well. I'm sure he'll have some thoughts, and we'll learn more about that Sea Trees program as well by Sustainable Surf. So
Yeah, looking
keep an
forward
eye
to
out
it.
keep an eye out for that, or an ear out for that. That'll be coming. But you guys go check out this article on The Guardian. Keep up with this. And if you're not already well versed in carbon offsets, carbon credits, if you're already tackling your emissions, reducing them on your own, do that first. When it's time, go learn about offsets and credits. Get some good resources. We'll put a few for you, but there's a lot out there that you need to know. And then be sure to check out Sea Trees, who we're going to drop here probably in a few weeks. So, anything else on that, Mackenzie?
No, nothing else on that. I think you hit the nail on the head with, yeah, I think really even consumers too, I want to put out there. It's like learn about the different scope emissions. GHG protocol is a great place to start. We can link that in the show notes as well. It's like just the more you know about greenhouse gases and the different scope emissions, it's the more you'll be armed to kind of ask your favorite brands or companies these questions about their carbon footprint.
And that's a great point. I'll finish with this on this topic, because as consumers, we do need to hold brands accountable, push them, give them pressure. And it doesn't always mean changing your brand, your favorite brand or your favorite product. It sometimes just means calling them up, writing them a note, hitting them up on social media or on their e-commerce site, whatever it is. But if they're talking about reducing their emissions, what we really want, those numbers that and figures that I just talked about, that is talking about, as you just mentioned, scope 3 emissions. So we are challenging and pushing more and more companies and brands to take ownership of their emissions and pollutants, not just at their headquarters and offices. That's kind of the easy part. If you've got an office here in Costa Mesa or in San Diego or Los Angeles, and you just go, oh, I will measure my footprint based on the electricity that we use here and our waste here, it's actually that can be difficult, but that's only the beginning. That's a tiny fraction of our actual footprint. What they need to do is also get that data from their suppliers and their suppliers, everything upstream, as we say, and also downstream. What are the emissions associated with the use of that product? It's end of life. That's where it gets really difficult, but that is where the big impacts are. So I'm glad you brought that up, because the more that consumers are aware of the different types of emissions and making sure that their favorite brands and companies are talking about those upstream and downstream emissions, then we're going to be okay. But there's a lot of work to do in this space. So good job bringing that up. But we will revisit this, because it'll be interesting to see where this goes. We'll talk to Michael and Sea Trees and see what they have to say.
Definitely.
All right. Speaking of Sea Trees and speaking of surfing, this next article, I'll kind of lead in with this one, Mackenzie, because we've seen it kind of pop up, and people have been hitting me up about this, going, "Hey, did you see this? And what do you think about it?" There was an article on the BBC. It was about the surf industry, and it was this idea. Well, I should say, so women's champ Lucy Campbell, she was advocating for stronger sustainability initiatives in the brands that she appreciates in the surf world, right? And it felt like there was a little bashing going on, and maybe it was putting more negatives than positives. I don't know. Mackenzie, what was your take as you read this article? What did you take away from it?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. As someone who has been a longtime fan and supporter and been a part of these brands, a lot of larger surf brands I've worked for as a retail employee and have loved the product. Hearing, I think, maybe some of the criticism is it does kind of make you like the surf community. It's just so tight knit that it kind of makes you feel like, oh my gosh, like my my turf is kind of being, knocked around a little bit, and it kind of makes you get a little defensive. I think that's human nature, but I think Lucy Campbell, and I think some of the journalists who write for the BBC bring up some valid points. I mean, as much as I love the surf industry, I think they ask some meaningful questions that are worth looking at and talking about.
Well, they do, and I think it's important. I do wonder. I'm wondering, for example, how familiar Lucy is with sort of the progress that's being made. There is some. I think there's some decent progress in surfboards. And in all fairness, I that was the first time I've heard of Lucy Campbell, so I shouldn't assume that she's not tuned in or tapped in, because she's just saying, hey, brands need to change. And I'm actually not sure. This article really leans into surfboards and wetsuits mostly.
Mm-hmm.
No mention of soft goods or, footwear or accessories. So, that's where we spend a lot of time working with companies and brands on that.
Right.
But they basically point out how toxic, toxic resins and what's going on with wetsuits and neoprene, those do have a heavy impact. But again, going back to our friends at Sustainable Surf who are coming up, who did that Sea Trees program, they've done a lot of work on the eco board space and really pushing that, the shaper industry into much more sustainable materials. So a lot of progress there. I know brands are working hard on neoprene and wetsuits and using, tree-based natural rubber, moving away from conventional neoprene. There's a lot of work in, not enough, I will grant that, of work in the soft goods side, moving to more responsible materials, preferred materials, tackling hazardous chemicals and better working conditions, traceability. It's all happening. Probably not as at the pace that we need it to. Not probably, but for sure not at the pace that we need it to. But I do think there's an opportunity to have kind of a more balanced approach. This was a really short article for how sort of damning it is.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of specifics, not a lot of details, very short. It's almost like this is a huge topic. This is almost like a multi, series, because I mean, for me, I've been working in this space in the surf industry, for example, since, I don't know, 2009 was really when I started, tackling. Back then we just called it eco, being green, but sustainability. And so for years, and at the time, your dad, McKenzie, was doing it as well. He was at Quicksilver. He was the head of sustainability for Quicksilver's program.
Mm-hmm.
Soul Tech, all the brands at Soul Technologies, Billabong, there a lot of organizations have been really pushing hard, but it takes time. It's a slow mid-course correction, as we call it, an ode to Ray Anderson's book, Mid-Course Correction. It takes a lot of time, but I'm excited. I think what we'll do is I'm going to follow up, because I know the Sustainable Surf guys have some thoughts on this. The Surf Industry Members Association, our friend Vipe Desai, who's the executive director over there, I know he's got some thoughts. So I'm going to work with those guys, see if we can get some thoughts. I have a feeling they're going to be putting out some either blog posts or just replies to this to kind of say, hey, you're right, a lot of impacts, but we're making some good progress. Did anything particularly stand out to you in this, McKenzie? Because there was one line in here that really got to me, and I'm like, I'm not sure if that's actually true. Anything on your side?
There wasn't anything, no quotes or anything like that, but I think one thing that really did stand out to me is just the power that pro athletes and team riders that they can have when they decide to step up and, I guess, advocate for something. And it doesn't necessarily have to be sustainability, but any sort of social project or anything like that. It's like when you get a big name or someone who's well known. Again, this is admittedly the first time that I'm hearing of Lucy Campbell, and I think she probably has a huge following over in the UK. But here in California, Southern California, Central California, I don't think we hear her name as much. But just seeing that, I mean, to be picked up by the BBC, it's like that's a big deal. So I think that's something to keep in mind about these pro athletes. It's like they have a lot of pull.
That's a great point and a big opportunity. If you've got a big following, if you are an influencer, if you are an athlete, you can really have an impact by just bringing things to awareness and asking those same questions that the average consumer should. Like, hey, why is my brand not doing enough? This could be the prompt that kind of gets the industry to go, oh, actually we are. And we're going to come together and try to tell a better story and hold our brands accountable. So yeah, Lucy, good on you, because this could really open things up, start a great conversation. What got me though is there was this line that says the average surfer's carbon footprint is said to be 50% greater than the average person's. There's
Mm.
no data, there's no citing on that, so I'm not sure where that comes from. I think they were alluding though to international travel, maybe the average pro surfer. I know for
Hmm.
me, I ride my bike down essentially 100% down to go surfing, and I keep my boards for a long time. Same with my wetsuits, and I feel like I try to do it pretty responsibly. But of course, it has a greater footprint. But 50% time than the average person's, I've got a question mark on that one. So
Yeah.
but that's it for this week. I think, Mackenzie, that's all good stuff. You guys go check out these articles, go check out all the links, keep learning. There's a lot of things in here that you can continuously learn about. That's our whole point. Hope you got something out of this. Be sure to tune in next week. We'll do the same. We'll pull 2 or 3 things out of the current happenings and try to find the good things that are happening underneath. Meanwhile, our first expert interview, like I said, is scheduled to drop on right before World Oceans Day. We're looking sometime early June, so stay tuned. We're either going to drop it Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. Haven't decided what our new schedule is going to be, but stay tuned for that. You'll hear from Trey Packard and Akira Biondo, the heads and co-founders of Pangea Seed Foundation. You guys are going to love them. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Mackenzie, thanks for being here on Memorial Day, and I hope you have a great rest of the weekend.
Thanks, Derek. You too. And to all of our listeners, thanks for joining in. And yeah, we'll see you guys next week.
See you guys next week. Thanks, everyone. Hey, thanks for listening. This is a show produced by the Underswell and our School of Understanding. If you're interested in being a part of this movement and want to dive deeper into the art of understanding sustainability better so that you can do things better, be sure to visit us at theunderswell.com. We offer structured, easy-to-follow workshops, courses, and member resources to make sustainability a part of your career or lifestyle. Because remember, no matter what role you play a role, and we're here for you. Thanks again.